Hello, my name is Mackenzie. I am from the VU University in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And today I will be presenting the first part of Module 2 on grammar and emotion. The title of the first part is Words and Emotion. The second part of the module, the part that will come after this one, will explain how morphology and syntax are associated with emotions. The job of morphology is to change the form of words, and the job of syntax is to string words together into clauses and sentences. The common factor here is the word. Many words, even when they occur alone, have an emotional charge. So let's start Module 2 by looking at the contribution of words to the expression of emotions. Sometimes the charge associated with a word is quite neutral, but there are many words in English and in all the languages of the world that are either positively or negatively charged. For different individuals, the charge may be different. Think of words like bullfighting or socialism. Depending on your views, on your personal views, you will probably have either positive or negative feelings about those words. In different cultures, too, the charges may be different, even if the words are basically the same. In Spanish, típico has a positive feel about it, invoking traditional folk values. In English, typical has a negative load, suggesting predictable bad behavior. People sometimes say typical, meaning that was to be expected that they would behave so badly. Words can also change their value. I mentioned that I work in the Netherlands, and I remember how after a number of people were maimed by fireworks, the charge of the Dutch word for fireworks, vuurwerk, switched from positive to negative. Now this module will explore how words are associated with this very kind of emotional value. The book that's been most influential in this area is a book by Charles Osgood, George Soucy, and Percy Tannenbaum called The Measurement of Meaning. They refer to the differences that we've been talking about as the semantic differential, semantics being the study of meaning. Now, not all words are relevant to the semantic differential. People working in this area have focused on adjectives, words like happy, but also on nouns like concert, or verbs like destroy. In fact, the three authors began with adjectives only. But nowadays, researchers in this area are also including nouns and verbs. What we call function words, little words like articles, pronouns, and prepositions, are not relevant to this kind of study because they are generally quite neutral. A word like at doesn't spark off any emotions. So all this means that this particular branch of linguistics, the study of words and emotions, is restricted to lexical words, the words that make up what we call our lexicon. That's the list of words that we know and use. Now, all lexical words have a denotation. This is their objective meaning, if you like. Think, for example, of the English word basement. And that means the part of a building that is partly or completely below ground level. Now, lexical words not only have a denotation, but they can also have one or more connotations. For example, because basements are often dark and used for storage, and people don't often go there very frequently, the word basement may have connotations for you like creepy, scary, spooky. Notice that all these connotations are rather emotional. Something similar, but at the other extreme of the building, applies to the Spanish word ático. And as we mentioned, connotations can change. And nowadays, when living space is at a premium, basements are often being developed into little underground apartments by people with an alternative lifestyle. So basement, at least for people who appreciate that lifestyle, may have emotionally positive connotations like cozy, exciting, trendy. Now, the authors of The Measurement of Meaning looked at a large number of English adjectives, and they used a quantitative technique called factor analysis in order to discover what the major factors were that organize the language of emotion. And what they found is that the connotations of the adjectives they analyzed could be classified along 3 dimensions, and they called them evaluation, potency, and activity. Evaluation ranges from favorable to unfavorable, or in simple terms, from good to bad. Potency, think about what the word means, it ranges from powerful to powerless. And activity ranges from active to passive. Now, in principle, every lexical word can be classified on these scales and given a position in a kind of 3-dimensional cube. For example, peaceful will generally be evaluated as favorable, but diseased as unfavorable. Brave will be evaluated as powerful, feathery as powerless. Fiery will be evaluated as active, restful as passive. Now, all of this is quite intuitive. In other words, it aligns with our common sense. But how are we going to evaluate peaceful in terms of potency and activity? How are we going to evaluate fiery in terms of evaluation and potency, and so on? To try and answer these questions, we need research, and a lot of it has been done. 60 years of research, in fact, and through those 60 years, people have come to new insights and actually to new vocabulary for talking about the 3 dimensions. So the terms that are now used are valence, which has replaced evaluation. Valence is described actually now in more emotional terms as ranging from pleasant to unpleasant. Potency is now called arousal, and again is described in more emotional terms as ranging from calm to excited. And activity is now called dominance, and concerns the extent to which the word makes you feel in control or out of control. These terms, valence, arousal, and domination, are also more psychological. And if you think about it, they can be used not just to describe the connotations of words, but in the case of emotions, also their denotations. Okay, so think of a state of mind like serenity. And that, I think, could be classified as pleasant, calm, and in control, while disgust would be unpleasant, somewhere between calm and excited, and out of control. So, I mentioned that a lot of research has been done. What's it used for? Well, one thing is simply for understanding emotions. And that can be important for all sorts of reasons, including clinical purposes, people who have difficulty with their emotional life. It's also good for more scientific purposes, like understanding how words are processed in the brain and how the different parts of the brain, we'll come to this later, are involved in the processing of emotional words. Another thing that's turned out to be very useful in all kinds of practices, for example in business, is our ability to automatically determine the sentiment of a text. Right? Is a text let's say, in favor of expanding the European Union, or is it against it? That kind of question can be determined automatically on the basis of this kind of analysis. And then people who are working in business often introduce new brand names like Pentium, right? How are people going to feel about such a word? this kind of research can be used for that. How is the research done? Well, in all sorts of ways, but one option, which is very popular, is to use the internet to reach thousands of language users. This is called crowdsourcing. And this allows very accurate measurement of how much agreement there is across the population. And we can measure the standard deviation, as they say, the extent to which there is or is not agreement. And this then also allows us to research to dig a bit deeper and to look at different age groups, different genders, different dialects within a single language, and so on. Another technique is to use large collections of texts, what we call corpora, which is the plural of corpus. And people look in particular at those texts that contain many value judgments. For example, when people online review a hotel or a restaurant or a film. Okay, so you have a site like Rotten Tomatoes or Tomatoes, where people can put their opinions of a movie that they've seen. Why do we work with words? Why do we not just go directly to the emotions? Well, emotions are rather slippery. To this day, we still haven't come up with a totally satisfactory definition or even listing of emotions. So words have many advantages. One is it's very easy to count their length, either in letters or in phonemes. We also now know, thanks to research, what the relevant and relative frequency of words is in various genres. We have good information about the age of acquisition, at what age children or indeed adults learn words. We know their history in the language. We know their etymology, where they come from. And we can use morphology, to be talked about in the next part of this module, to determine their structure. So words give us something quite concrete to work with. However, there are some drawbacks. A word may, for example, not have an equivalent in another language. Take the English word dumpster. If you look at Spanish, you have to say contenedor de basura. So you have two words there, two lexical words, contenedor and basura, and the morphology could, and the methodology could only use either one or the other, but not the combination. Some words are ambiguous. Many are, in fact. Consider anxious. In a sentence like, she was looking anxious, then this word, in terms of valence, would be unpleasant. In terms of arousal, would be excited. And in terms of dominance would be out of control. But the values would be quite different for something like, I'm anxious to see my father again, right? Where it's a pleasant feeling. And words often get their meaning from their collocation. If you take a verb like break, right? If you say something like to break a world record, for example, in athletics, then that's a positive thing. But to break a priceless vase is negative. Okay, so it depends on which other words they go together with. So there are limitations to working with words. Now let's look at the three categories distinctly: valence, arousal, and domination. Or, as they say nowadays, dominance. Dominance is better than domination, I think. So what do we say about valence? Well, that's the scale from pleasant through neutral to unpleasant. Right? An example of a neutral valence word would be something like stapler. I mean, do you have any emotions about a stapler? Right? People find it to be neither pleasant nor unpleasant. But an example, this has come out of research, of a word with extreme valence is masturbate. Right? People find this to be either pleasant or unpleasant. People react in experimental situations more quickly to that kind of extreme valence words. They have what is called a low reaction time. Okay, so that people then are usually asked to press a key on a computer, and they do so more quickly if the word has a strong valence. But if they're presented with a neutral word like stapler, it takes them longer to work out what their reaction is. And these extreme valence words trigger greater activation in the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the brain here at the front, which characterizes the human brain more than other animals. So you have greater activation there. People's judgments about valence are also well distributed over the whole scale, from pleasant to unpleasant. Okay, so that people are pretty good at characterizing words on this dimension. Moving on now to arousal, this is the scale from calm through neutral to excited. Okay, so a word like stapler will typically leave people feeling rather calm. Right? It's rather nice to know that if you have some paper, you have a stapler there to link them together. That gives you a nice calm feeling. But perhaps not surprisingly, a word like masturbate will make them feel excited. Now, high arousal correlates with high activation of the amygdala. These are two almond-shaped brain areas that are located deep within the temporal lobes of the brain, and they are associated with emotions. Fear in particular, perhaps that's our strongest emotion, but other emotions too. Now, relatively few words spark off high arousal. Okay, and you can see from the chart there that words tend to cluster towards the middle. But there are rather more words that cause low arousal than high arousal. Most words are fairly neutral, but high arousal, interestingly, correlates with extreme valence. And if you have a good look at the chart, you'll see that this is the case. What about dominance? Well, this is the scale that leads from feeling in control, through being neutral, to feeling out of control. Right? A word like angry will have a positive value for dominance, because you're angry and you feel that you can do something about it, right? You're in control. But fearful is rather different, right? Then you feel rather out of control. It's sometimes said that dominance, because this has to do with control, is more influenced by our will, by our conscious preferences and intentions. And dominance correlates rather well with valence, to such an extent that some people have actually suggested that we don't need the concept of dominance. However, there are some words where valence and dominance don't correlate so well. Okay, so a word like angry has low valence. It's an unpleasant feeling, but it does give you a feeling, at least temporarily, of being in control. If you're loved, that gives you a very good feeling, but that's not something that you can control. That's up to other people. And if you're sleepy, right, that's generally a nice feeling, but that's obviously leads you to being less in control. So low dominance. What about gender? Well, it seems that gender does contribute to variability. Females in general show greater arousal for negative valence. So if something is unpleasant, females will feel more excited about that than men do. There are also differences across language communities. In Italian, it's been found that there are higher valence and dominance values for males, but higher arousal values for females. And generally, the valence values for females are more extreme in all languages, but for some reason, that didn't come out of the research into French. Portuguese and Polish females reveal higher reactivity to emotional stimuli than the corresponding males. But the Portuguese as a whole have less extreme values than Americans, in the sense of people from the United States. And comparing Spanish people to Americans, we find that Spanish people have less overall valence, but higher overall arousal, but again, lower overall dominance. And for Spanish people, there are no significant differences between males and females. Okay, there are all these little pieces of data. How to understand them is something that people are still working on. What about the different semantic areas? Well, there are taboo words or sexual terms. And here there's high variability in valence and arousal. And gender seems to be also involved. Okay, so take a word like dominatrix. Okay, there's a lot of variation in how people would respond to a word like that. In Italian, they discovered that all of this kind of word had higher valence for males than for females. And then diseases. Well, not surprisingly, all of these have low valence and low dominance. Okay, they're unpleasant and they make us feel out of control. But also high arousal, right? They make us also feel very emotional. And this is particularly true of sexually transmitted diseases, cancer, Alzheimer's, stroke, and the like. When it comes to professions, one perhaps surprising result is that there's a negative correlation between valence and income. In other words, in simple terms, the more you earn, the more unpleasant people think you are. And then finally, weapons. Here, gender differences between males and females are very visible. For males from the United States, weapons have higher valence, dominance, and arousal. Okay, so they make American males feel pleasant, in control, and excited, as compared to females from that country. Okay, so these are findings that stimulate all kinds of possible conclusions. But rather than thinking about that, I'd like to end by looking at the applications to the discourse of corporate and institutional work. In the workplace, for many people, describing their emotions is hard. We all know that at work, emotions are unavoidable. They occur every day, and they influence our productivity, our job satisfaction, and all kinds of aspects of corporate life. The English language is very rich in words for talking about how we feel, but nevertheless, we may not be very confident about using them, especially in the workplace. The workplace, we still have this idea that it should be rational and reasonable rather than emotional. Well, it could be that a model like the one I've been talking about with the 3 dimensions can provide a framework in which people can talk more precisely and with more nuance about their emotions. Okay, so if you look at the box here, you'll see various adjectives that indicate more refined emotions than simply I'm feeling good or I'm feeling bad. And this then can be used as a starting point for further explorations of the emotions that arise in the workplace. Okay, so if you are feeling, let's say, acquiescent, then that means that you have a good feeling, but that you're feeling calm and you're happy to be out of control. On the other hand, if you're feeling furious, right, that's a negative feeling, and you're excited and you also feel in control, right? And I will leave it to you then to consider the other 6 and also how other adjectives that express emotions could be classified along these 3 dimensions. It can also be used for describing people's reaction to products, clients, or as are often called, end users, the final recipient of a product. In a survey or a questionnaire, you can classify feelings however they're expressed. For example, in those online product reviews I talked about before, in this 3-dimensional space. Okay, so you can ask the basic questions: did they find the product pleasing, neutral, or not so pleasing to use? Did they find it calming or exciting? Did they feel in control of the product or out of control of the product? For a washing machine, I think the ideal probably would be pleasant to neutral kind of feeling, calming to neutral arousal, and in control, right? You want to be in control of what your washing machine does. But for a powerful motorbike, the ideal, again, would be pleasant, certainly exciting, and I think also elements of out of control. You like to think that this machine, you know, could almost take off by itself. And for another kind of product, totally different, like babies' nappies, then I think the most important thing is that the applicant of the nappy, shall we say, rather than the wearer, is in control. And this is much more important than pleasantness or arousal. I think none of us find nappies particularly pleasant or exciting. And finally, I'd like to mention the fact that work these days is involving ever closer cooperation between human agents and robots. robots and other intelligent machines are now able to carry out rational tasks as well as physical operations that previously were the province of administrative and manual labor. And generally, they do it better. In addition, enormous advances have been achieved in machines' ability to recognize the human voice and to respond to commands. However, full cooperation between humans and machines will not be possible as long as the machines cannot recognize and cannot react to the emotional aspect of human interaction. I grant you that machines can do quite well. They can already measure outward signs of emotion like skin temperature, heartbeat, respiratory rate, and so on. But they cannot yet fully mimic humans' ability to read each other's emotions from their words, from their tone of voice, from their gestures, from their eye movements, and from their bodily movements too. So work is ongoing on the machine recognition of emotions, and the valence arousal dominance framework I've been talking about is proving its worth in this field. It can be used to identify the 8 extreme emotions, the 8 corners of the cube that I showed in slide 8 above, right? Or the 8 adjectives in the chart that I just talked about. So once you have those in place, the less extreme emotions can be left to machine learning. So to summarize, many lexical words, nouns, verbs, and adjectives have a positive or a negative feel to them, although quite a few are also neutral. And this observation inspired Osgood, Susi, and Tannenbaum to study the emotional charge of words using the quantitative methodology of factor analysis. And their work revealed that 3 dimensions are needed to classify the connotations of words, known to them as the semantic differential. Okay, those 3 dimensions were evaluation, potency, and activity. So words were used in this way as a pathway into the mysterious world of emotions. Now, more recent empirical and practice-oriented versions of this work have renamed the dimensions as valence, arousal, and dominance, respectively. We've seen that there is individual variation in how words are experienced along those 3 dimensions. And we've seen that there are also differences between genders, across language communities, and also in terms of the different semantic areas. And all this work has proved its relevance. It helps us to improve interaction between human beings, but also between human beings and robots at the workplace and beyond, and also as permitting reliable analysis of how clients react to products. Okay, that was an introduction from me to the study of emotions and words. The module will now continue with a study of emotions and their interaction with syntax and morphology. Thank you very much.